right. Yeah, I actually thought I finished this, but I hadn't. So yeah, finishing it now. Let's go.
I had time to, acclimate myself to it. And then, you know, uh, we did this thing, and Frank noticed that all the players who had to come in and sight read it because they were known for that seemed to live in mortal terror, and they
Yeah.
would gather around the Coke machine or the coffee urn at breaks and live in fear that they were going to get called for a cornflake commercial on a Monday morning that would and be faced with the black page
Yep.
so full of notes and so
Yeah,
fast that they
that it
couldn't
was
play
black.
it, right?
Right.
And then their jobs and their
Yeah.
reps
That's
and
right.
everything would be lost. So Frank thought that was hilarious, and so he said, "I'm going to write my own black page," and then he referred to it as it being high in statistical density.
I
Yes.
love that
Yes.
phrase.
Fantastic.
That's right, which made it to the album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made it to the record.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
So now it's a famous piece.
Yeah,
And, the name of the Black Page has a mystique about it. And
Yeah.
I mean, I have a theory about the composition. First of all, it's a fantastic piece of music.
Yeah.
It is.
You know,
This is what I had to play.
and when I listen to it on the record, I can't help but think that you're playing the hi-hat mainly because, well, maybe for two reasons. Number one, to give the audience some clue as to where these rhythms are at, so that they have,
Or the band.
or it
Yes,
could also be
exactly.
for the band.
It's like a click track.
Because I think that Frank wrote the tune certainly not with the hi-hat in mind.
Yeah, but he did tell me play the hi-hat along with it, keep time, and so I kind of learned it that way. And I'd forgot that wasn't written in, and so many people talk about that, and it's
Yeah.
a real overlooked thing for me. It's just, you've got to be tapping something to play that stuff.
Well, you do,
Get
but I mean,
lost, you
as
know,
a
so-
listener, if you take away the hi-hat for a second, and
Yeah.
then as a listener, hear the music in space as opposed to according to regular time, and it takes on a whole different dimension.
It's
You know,
beautiful.
especially when you get to the 5/16 section. You know, that's a new tempo.
Yeah.
And without the quarter note, it sounds like you're somewhere else, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you're back. You know,
Yeah.
and then all the the stretching, the rubber band phrases that occur. It's when you take the hi-hat away, it's a whole different piece.
Yeah, and he was a master of that. I just love the notes. It's like such an out piece, but it's also consonant.
Yeah,
You know,
it
he
is.
uses
It's beautiful.
like seconds and fourths and sixths and just lots of just really kind of pan diatonic. It just works. It's so easy to hear the melody of that, and he had a knack at choosing the right notes. For making a point, it wasn't just any random note.
No.
And he could put them together that just took you like really edgy out when he wanted to be atonal, or he could put it, way inside and beautiful, and then have maybe the rhythm be the focal point of the outness. And so then once again, there's this balance. Slanimsky talks about that. There's a balance in music that says that if something's real heavy melodically, it can't be as heavy harmonically or rhythmically. And people have tried to serialize this, and they've made shit music. So one thing, if you think of, say, Indian music, where rhythm and melody are high, then harmonically it's on a drone to
That's right.
compensate. So there's this balance aspect, and Frank had a real good way, intuitively, of knowing what to do that just balanced his pieces. He's phenomenal at that.
Terry,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Just a quick question. Do you think Frank's drumming style affected you, influenced you?
Yeah, because I think where his drumming style came from was ionization. He was way into doing that, and he suggested
But
things.
he did have certain kind of things that he'd gravitate towards when he
Yeah.
wrote a drum. Like
Absolutely. Well, these
I
rhythms.
can think of even he loved the sound of two snare and floor tom, then bass drum being the
Yeah.
other part of a line, like
Yeah, all that stuff. He said
Like-
Shelly Manne was one of the only guys who could read hand-to-foot stuff when he first started hiring studio musicians. And then, like 200 Motels has like massive stuff in Uncle Meat that's all that way, all written out. Ainsley played, and that's why Ainsley got the gig,
Right.
And he's another one of my favorites. I just love him. And, he liked that about me, and he knew what hip was as a drummer. He knew Tony. He may not say, I like Miles or I like Tony. As a matter of
Right.
fact, he hated them openly. But on the other hand, he knew what hip was, and he had really good taste. And to prove it, the introduction of the Black Page is a note-for-note rip-off of me playing out of a 10-minute drum solo, one little thing that's note-for-note rip-off of Tony Williams off a Stanley Clarke album.
Oh, really?
And Zappa obviously had very good taste because he took those two bars to do the intro, and there was immortalized on vinyl,
Before
me
the
ripping
ink,
off. Yeah.
the bit before the
Yeah, right
composed bit,
before the
yeah.
actual composition starts. It's a little drum solo thing, just
Well,
It's right off
that's
Tony.
not your improvisation?
It was
It
an
is.
improvisation, but that section was note for note Tony Williams off Stanley Clarke's Born to Love You or one of those
Okay,
records, you
okay,
know, in the
right.
70s. And it was like the newest, hippest thing Tony had done, and I was stealing it, and I was working
And it sounded so cool.
You know, it's one of those moments where you go,
Yeah.
okay, you know, well, I can't do that as good as Tony even, so where's Terry in all this, you know? So after I left Frank were the lessons of how do I begin my own style, and Bruford with sounds and those choices, you know, approaching it linear melodic instead, started to sink in. And then later on, you know, all of my experiences, Zappa and all this stuff started to come in. I started to write classical stuff and, you know, things like that. But yeah, you know.
Did you guys feel the same when you worked with him? Did you get drumistic things that you took from it, or not so much?
Not really.
No?
No, not for me. I mean, like I said, again, I came in, I kind of came in on the back door of what Ralph had already did. So my function there was different. I mean, you know, like, because he's, as much as said, it's like, well, his instructions to me were, I really want this stuff to be, you know, it's the feel. I want a little more of the funk side. You know, if you can learn everything perfectly, great, but don't worry about that. Ralph can do that, you know. I mean, my own work ethic that anyway, was that I'm going to learn this. I mean, there's no way I'm going to be up there faking parts, you know.
Oh, yeah, you
So I
can.
just really set out to really try and learn it. So it was kind of an open book. I mean, it was kind of like I was there to double with Ralph, but not to mimic him, you know. And then, you know, and it got to be with his solos. I mean, it was very strange for me at first, but, you know, what he wanted me to do in his solos, he was wanting me to follow him mathematically, which I'm sure he probably told you guys the same thing. It wasn't, so I'd be playing, and I mean, I got, you know, if you're there long enough, you get to hear his figures, and you kind of know not know what's coming, but you can immediately know what it is when you're hearing it. And so the challenge for me was that trying to keep a pocket, but if he rips into a 7 or a 9 or something, trying to be there with him, you know. And it got to the point where we actually could do it, you know, which was like, couldn't think about it. There was no way you couldn't think about it and do it, but I got used to hearing how he played and was able to kind of track with him. So, but the things were written, you know, exactly. I mean, they were certainly written exactly, and I tried to learn them that way, but there always needed to be something different. You know, I mean, like say, either if he didn't write it for us to, you know, two specifically different parts, then we kind of worked out things so that we were, you know, it was just different. It was kind of like, I mean, I felt like I had a really easy time hearing what you guys went through, actually. But, you know, as much as it was, you know, I mean, as specifically as he wrote it, I wasn't there to do I kind of had to play it and stay out of his way at the same time. So, you know.
Could I say a couple of things now?
Yeah, please.
They're sort of building up, so I hope I can remember, or that they're still relevant. For
No, they are.
Probably the moment
It's
has
all
passed.
relevant.
Well, you know, I didn't want to give the impression that I had a free ride for an audition, because he did finally make me walk through the fire. You know, when I heard your story, I got to tell you, I'm sitting here, and my heartbeat is racing, and my palms are starting to get wet, and I'm really feeling as if, oh my God, it's, you know, I'm experiencing what you're saying. That's just harrowing, and it all comes back to me. He did actually put me through hell finally at one point, which was when I was no longer just recording with him every now and then, and he really wanted me to tour. He was auditioning for the Grand Wazoo, for the touring band, the touring version of that, though I wasn't on the album. And he had 3 of LA's finest studio guys, and I don't want to mention their names. They're still in LA, they're still playing, they're great. I didn't even know at the time how great they were, because I just wasn't part of that world, having just moved out from New York. You know, the studio guys in those days were sort of anonymous. And I had to do everything that they had to do, and it was the tough stuff. It was Gregory Peccary and all of that hard music. Well, I might even have some of it there. And at the end of it, and it did take 3 days, just like yours, at the end of it, I found out that I got the gig, and what I heard from Gail was that Frank always knew he wanted me to do it. He just wanted to make sure that I could stand up under the pressure and do it, so that if we toured in Europe, I wouldn't suddenly walk out on stage and see vast quantities of people and go, oh my God, and run away. And I just thought that was cruel in a way because, well, I mean, what about the other guys? I don't even mean cruel toward me. Oh, okay. He knew all along that he wanted it to be me, and here they are auditioning, playing this tough music, going through hell.
Yeah, but they got stories from it.
Yeah, and it's like, it's like
they're telling all their
I guess
it's like, you hate your drill sergeant at first, but then you love your drill sergeant because he's like a mother hen, and all those things that he puts you through are something you'll need on the field of battle.
Terry, that is a whole other topic about the ambivalence, about the complicated relationships between every musician and Frank.
Oh, yeah.
Not only drummers and percussionists, but all of us. And that's one of the reasons, in fact, why even though Frank is gone, and I can't even believe he's been gone since December of '93, is it? That we still talk about him, we still think about him, we still, we still remember these events in our lives.
I swear, the only good part about him not being here anymore is my fear went away when he died. My fear that he would call me to do something I was not ready for and put me through that again as an adult.
And Terry, can I tell you something? I had more fear after he died. My fear was that I would never encounter music I wanted to play again. And it's only happened a couple of times, and I've done those other things. And truly, except for Bach and Mozart, going back to my roots and piano, there really isn't any great motivating force in my life to get me to uncover the marimba and try to even get around the keyboard anymore.
Okay.
It's the music.
I hereby
and it's
vow
not there
to write
anymore.
a piece of music for you, Ruth.
Okay, I hereby
Just
accept
for you.
the
I'll
challenge.
work with you.
And,
you know.
And Terry, there's something else I wanted to say, which is just because we had this stack. This is the drum part to a piece that I don't think you ever had to play. And guys, this is the rest of it. This is a piano reduction that was published, so I feel fine to bring it. But it was really sort of an homage to the Strav, as I call him, Stravinsky. You were saying that Frank's drum style, you think, came out of, or largely out of Varese. I got to tell you, to me, it came almost completely out of Stravinsky.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know L'Histoire de Soldat.
Yeah,
Yes,
sure.
do.
Okay, well, that's so like it. I mean, it's melodic drumming. You know, you wrote that book also. And this is back in '68, for goodness sake.
Yeah, and I mean, literally, your setup was pretty much that setup, L'Histoire de Soldat setup, right? Did that have a marimba in it, though?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
What, L'Histoire? No.
Yeah, no,
No, there's no melody.
it was like
Drums.
just
Yeah,
drums.
drums.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But the triangle, there was a wood block, I think, tambourine, and
Yes. Oh, and by the way, someone mentioned a piccolo, 13-inch piccolo drum. Was it you, dear, at your audition? God, I sound so motherly,
yours?
dear. You know, that was Frank's drum, and I got to tell you, I'm going to go to my grave wondering about this. About 6 months before he died, he called me up, and it was he actually on the phone. It wasn't someone else that he got to dial the number because he really was sick. And he wanted to know if I had any idea where that piccolo drum was, which I thought was kind of strange because he had used that drum long after my time with him. So how in the world would I possibly, I couldn't say, oh, you don't remember we lost it in Austin, Texas, or something like that. He had it, you're telling me, at his house. But I just thought that was the most poignant, heartbreaking thing, that with everything he was dealing with and the physical pain he was in and the rush to try to get as much done as possible before he couldn't work anymore, he's obsessing over what happened to the piccolo drum. Yeah. And now I'm obsessing about it.
Yeah.
Where the hell is that 13-inch piccolo drum?
There was a storage trailer that was like a semi off wheels that was in the parking lot of where we used to rehearse, and somebody broke into that and stole a bunch of stuff, and a lot of it came back because they I don't know, somehow traced it to serial numbers and stuff, but yeah, so perhaps that happened, I don't know.
Wow. But can you imagine, out of the blue, he calls me to ask me about that? And it wasn't a confrontational, what happened to my, it was, do you have any idea where it is? He wanted that drum.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
God knows what.
Well, man, you know, the reason why I say Varese, I know he loved Stravinsky as well,
Yeah,
and you can
yeah.
hear so much of that in his music. And you know, when he would go over to your setup when you were gone,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and it was there set up,
Yeah.
he would always play that kind of out classically ionization-y
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And you know, he at one point he said, you know, you're really good at all this going around the toms and junk, but you know, orchestrationally, I would like to hear something different. You know, what do you think about instead? You have what, 5 toms? Yeah. What about 5 different things like an anvil, a wood block, a cowbell, a tambourine, and a triangle, and play your same things, but it'll just be. And like I couldn't,
Yeah.
I just couldn't go there then. I was still holding on too much. But like I want to be like Tony, or I want to be like
Yeah.
Billy, or you know, I can't do that. And
Yeah, sure.
he suggested rototoms, right? I couldn't do that. One of the reasons why is because I couldn't figure out how to mount them. So later I actually got into the mechanic thing, and with a very complex little setup, got 360 degrees mobility and moved rototoms. Because remember that on the Octa Plus drums, those drums were so big that the tom holder was way out at the front of the bass
That's
drum.
right.
Right? So there's no way you could mount a rototom on that and play it out
Yeah,
there. You'd
that's
have to
right.
reach out 2 feet. So I figured out a way to come off that and make it comfortable, and started using them in Missing Persons. So many things like this. You know,
Yeah.
Missing Persons itself, he said, you know, well, I built a studio, you know, and we're up there talking to him in demo land, you know, making little, with little blast boxes, our you know, demos and junk. And he goes, yeah, I like this, you know, good luck with it and all. And he goes, well, you know, I built this studio, and it's just about done, and I'm going to go on the road. What do you say, you know, if you're working with Ken Scott, who he appreciated as a great engineer, did Billy Cobham and, you know, Tony and lots of Jeff Beck, Simon Phillips, he goes, why don't you have Ken Scott come up here and you can make your demo? You'll help me by getting all the bugs out of my studio. So when I come off the road, I'll know it'll work, and you'll have a demo. And I mean, that's how Missing Persons started. You know, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have what we ultimately sold, you know, just, you know, incredibly influential.
There was,
Have a break. I do find it fascinating, man. Maybe I said it in the other parts, I'm not sure, but I do just find it fascinating hearing people talk about. Because I can talk like this about guitars all day long. I can talk about different guitar players, different styles of guitar playing, but to hear people talk about it, it's because you think like drums isn't. It's all part of the same ballpark, but you really don't understand. Like I've played in bands with drummers and whatever, and you really don't understand kind of what the other person goes through. Like you said, even knowing how to set things up, and yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah. Hold on, 2 secs. Yeah, I thought of another thing as well. It's interesting. Before we finish this off, of how he kind of drills it, like they said, the drill sergeant. He puts you in situations to see if you're going to be able to handle it. Like, yeah. I tell you, if any Zappa fans watch this that aren't a fan of Rush, I'd advise listening to Rush, because with these guys, they had Zappa to kind of enforce this onto them. Um, but Rush did it to themselves and put these complicated things so it keeps you always present and having to know where you are, and even if you play something 1,000 times, it's still tricky. So you kind of get a bit nervous when that bit's coming up in a show, even though you play it night after night after night. You do it so complicated and so tricky that you still get that kind of buzz. But yeah, let's go.
One drum fill that became famous.
That he wrote.
No, that he said, Chester and Ralph, I want you to insert something here. And it was on the tune More Trouble Every Day.
Sure.
Right.
And you know the thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's this horn line.
Yeah.
Ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. So
Back up again.
So
Second.
exactly.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
So, but that rhythm really is a parody of the horn line that just comes before it, you know. And so Chester and I worked it out, and then next thing I know, I'm hearing Chester and Phil Collins using it
Absolutely.
with was it Genesis?
Oh yeah. First day of rehearsal, day I walked in. All right, how you play the lick? How do you play it? Come on, man. How do you play the lick? It's like, I mean, the first day, that was the first
That's
thing
so
he said to
funny.
me. It's like, how do you
But
play
I mean,
the lick?
that's such a.
It's the basis
Yeah.
of almost every double bass tom fill
Well,
that I
yeah,
do.
yeah.
Well, we did it with
But
we
you
did it with
had all those
toms,
one
too.
bass drum though, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, oh yeah.
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 But it was just, it
Well,
was
you had
one of
that
those
fast
licks
The
that
bass
just,
drums were always opposite, though.
Yeah.
They were always opposite, and we've never really got it right with Phil because he couldn't hear the other part. I always had to kind of fill in, and because he couldn't hear, like, you had to like totally change roles, and he just had the hardest time with that.
Wow.
Which is really weird because he's an amazing player, but
He really is.
That one thing just really throws him.
Well, I find, there's a, without a reference point of one, there's all kinds of rhythmic and musical blind spots that everybody has. You could start jamming on something, and then you watch Frank's foot, and you go,
Yeah.
oh, man,
Yeah, I
he's
know.
hearing it there.
Yeah.
Or Warren, I used to
Or-
do this, and,
Completely new tempo.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. But there was a vibe after you got used to Frank's, because it was such a personal approach to these things. You did become familiar, and it didn't get like harder. It was just more of it, right? But you were familiar with all the little sort of components, and he would always talk about everybody's pattern recognition, and that's what you had to have. And from working with him, you'd get very astute at picking up these little patterns. And so he would take a lick and string it together, and before you know it, you got some odd thing, and then you do that for so many, and then you'd go to this, but always after this weird thing was one, and there was this sort of
Right. You're right.
a
about
kind of a
that.
concept
And that
almost
could
of
be with
how he
lyrics
worked,
as well.
yeah.
Often with lyrics, rhythmic odd times
Yeah.
would be because of the
well,
lyric.
when I came in, like Guacamole Queen,
Yep.
this kind of thing, I said, is that how you come up with this stuff rhythmically? Do you like conversationally try and fit music to patterns of speech? And he said, sometimes, but he goes, more often than not, it's musical, and then we fit the lyrics in, And, but yeah, he definitely had a honed in style that once you kind of got the key to, it just seems second nature. If you
Right.
work
It's
with him
much
long
easier,
enough and were
yeah.
in there, you knew how he thought and how, from that angle.
But Terry, now you understand, for instance, with the example Guacamole Queen, that Frank didn't necessarily come up with all those lyrics, that it came out of the folklore, as it's called, stuff from the band, that Duke may have just thrown something out.
Yeah,
And then,
of course,
and
every
that's how
night,
that,
you know.
yeah.
And if something stuck, if he liked it, if he cracked up, that
That's
was
right,
in, you know.
right.
Yeah, he was more or less like an executive producer in that respect, where
Yes, or a
he
referee.
wouldn't fund
That's
it.
actually a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
idea.
yeah.
He wouldn't
Right,
fund it
right.
if it wasn't happening.
Yes.
But if he liked it, it stayed in his music. So he made the executive decision.
I'm
But
curious
yeah,
to know if
Puffy's
you guys...
Whips. There's so much stuff I just made up off the cuff to try and crack
Yeah.
him up. Patrick O'Hearn, there's
Yeah.
reams
Oh, yeah.
of stuff. That's all him. Just
Yeah. Do you guys happen to remember how he came about, how it came about that you can't do that? No. Don't you ever watch that thing?
Oh, yeah.
With the rests?
Yes.
Do you remember? I remember the day that happened, because that's not how the piece was written.
No,
I've
that's
heard
right.
this. Tell us.
Dun, dun,
Yeah.
right?
But
Da-da-da-dum.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
one.
but
There
originally,
There were 5 beats
Yeah, 5
of
beats in
silence.
between
Yeah,
each
5
thing,
beats.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't always that way.
No.
No.
So how did it-
You don't remember that?
Do you remember?
No, all I remember is that there was a manic moment where we were all having fun, which happened a lot. It wasn't just, a job. And someone got the idea. I thought it was you, Ralph, like, oh, hey, let's just not do anything there. And then, oh, yeah, let's try that. And Frank was doing his, with the mouth open.
Right.
Yeah,
like that,
leg,
and it
that,
just
yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was hard to play that. But that's, I actually remember that day. I remember where I was standing and how you looked and all of that. And I thought, this is amazing. And it just stays like that.
Well, there was one more thing that got added onto it. Since we had the silence, and there was time for me to stand up
Yes.
and do kind of like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
hairdo
yeah,
thing
yeah.
for those
That's
5
right,
beats,
that's
sit
right.
back down and play da-da-da-da.
And that is
stand up
not
again.
easy. Oh, my God.
No, it's
Yeah.
not easy.
Right.
Oh man!
Yeah.
Well,
You
I
know,
can remember one where he said, "I want this to be like folk rock," and he did that.
Yeah.
And so I started. He had told me that the actual drummer for the Byrds couldn't play in time, so I started pulling the time in and out, and he cracked him up, And we didn't do that in the real show, but just those things you do to get a laugh that are just
Yes.
so much fun.
And then all those endless moments on the road where there's just nothing to do, and Frank would be waiting for some bug to get fixed at the sound check or whatever, and he'd be doodling on guitar.
Yep.
And I always knew when those doodles were going to wind up being a piece. And remember, da 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 da.
Yeah.
He was playing that thing night after night after night backstage. And I kept thinking, oh God, please let it lay right on the marimba, because I saw my future coming. And very often stuff on the guitar had absolutely no.
Nothing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But although that was a good, and I, this is scary. It's been 30, how many years?
Plus, yeah.
34, 35 years. And I still remember saying to you, Ralph, when it goes, give me a second. Hold on, I got to play through the whole damn thing. Oh, when it hit the, saying the notes, that's it. And remember I said to you, I can't believe these guys know that.
Yeah.
I just heard it. So.
Oh, okay. And I said to
played it
you,
like 6
are we supposed to do it? Are we supposed to do it in a group of 4, da-da-da-da, 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 da-da-da, and then go back to 5, or is it just straight da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And you were saying, ooh, that's really interesting. And we tried it both ways. Then we asked him, and I think he said, whatever you want to do. And we just eventually settled back into 5. But I remember thinking, do you remember that?
Well,
I remember this stuff. This stuff haunts my life.
I know. Well, there's something about it where when you listen to the lick, it's a 5 lick, but it's got some other thing going on in it, where the accents are, and it's we smoothed it out somehow.
Yeah.
And I don't know specifically what we did, but yeah, it was something that we worked out.
Yeah.
And had determined this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah. And there's also one other thing. I don't know if this is funny or not, but I always find it funny in my own personal history, which is the Black Page. You all know how it is that when you're completely surrounded by the music and having to learn it and wanting to learn it and living it and practicing it all day and rehearsing it all night, that after a while you can't get these melodies or patterns or whatever it is that
Try to go to sleep.
right. And I remember distinctly one day in the supermarket down the street, and I would just sing da dee 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 dee. So I was essentially singing your solo, but with the melody that Frank had written. And to me, it was just, I could have been singing anything. It was a tune that was completely familiar to me.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that other people that might hear me singing under my breath wouldn't have known what the hell that is. It just sounds demented. And especially this last part. Terry, you know the part. Bump.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That stuff. And that's
Yeah.
the stuff I couldn't get out of my head. And one day I'm in the produce section and I was singing this while I was looking at apples or whatever. Do you know that people, I began to notice, were moving away from me? They actually, and I thought, oh my God, and I realized what it was. It was that I sounded like some lunatic singing this. And when I told it to Frank, because I thought he would be amused, he loved that story.
Yeah.
He loved it. I mean, that I had taken it into my heart and soul and didn't even realize I was singing it.
He summed it up one time for me. He said, his attitude for the audience was like, when they heard this was like, okay, dance to this. was fun.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great watch. That was a great request and a great watch. Very fascinating. And I was thinking to myself, I find it amazing that they remember them. But then when she kind of made it make sense to me because like I've seen it about like music isn't stored in the same place as memory. I watched this thing and it was about Alzheimer's and how I can't remember if it was an old woman or an old man had Alzheimer's. If you pointed at a piano and said, "What's that?" they wouldn't be able to even tell you what it was. But if you just sat them in front of it, they'd play these classical pieces because they're obviously a trained pianist or they play piano. Um, and music is weird like that. It is weird. It is like the old saying, um, like riding a bike, that you just never forget how to do it. And it really is like I know so many Bob Dylan songs, and I mean Bob Dylan songs that are like 7 minutes long. I can sing every single word when I'm playing it. But if the second I stop playing it, you said, "What's the third line in the third verse?" I wouldn't be able to tell you. I'd have to. But as soon as you, in fact, there's actually a Bob Dylan thing, which I don't know. Yeah, there's a great Bob Dylan moment with his, I can't understand how she let go of my hand and left me here facing the wall. Um, what is that song? See, I'm gonna have to go through all of it just to get to the chorus line. But yeah, that song, I can't understand how she let go of my hand, left me here facing the wall. I must insist, and feeling like this, I just can't go on anymore, or something like that. It is, but he starts playing it live in one of the live, like just him and a guitar, and he does the intro to it, and he just keeps looping it for 2 minutes. He just keeps going over and over and over and over this beginning bit, and then in the end, he says, "What's the first lines to this song?" And someone in the audience says, "I can't understand," and he goes, "Oh yeah, 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 I can't understand," and he just literally goes. And music's weird like that, yeah, of how you can be so blank, but then you just need that one little nudge, and then the whole thing comes back to you. It's crazy. So to see these sit here and talk about all these real intricate drum patterns for 35 years ago, yeah, it's just fascinating. But not only that, with just the stories of Zappa, to be fair, and they kind of make Zappa a bit more kind of like approachable, if that makes sense, or relatable, because he just seems like he's on a completely different planet, which he really is, to be fair. But yeah, to hear him like her tell that story of her singing something that he wrote and people thinking she's nuts, um, and him love, like, do you know what I mean? All that little stuff is just great to hear. Yeah. But anyway, that's the reaction. Sweet.